The city of New York never truly sleeps. Neon lights painted the skyline, and limousines crawled through Fifth Avenue, ferrying men and women who believed the world was theirs. In one of the most expensive penthouses overlooking Central Park, silence ruled. That silence wasn't peace, it was suffocating, heavy, waiting to be broken. Jacqueline Mitchell sat alone in the living room. Her hands trembled as she held a stack of papers, divorce papers. Her belly, 7 months swollen with the child she had prayed for, rose and fell with each shaky breath. Tonight should have been just another sleepless night, another lonely hour of waiting. But this time, she had made a decision. The clock ticked past midnight. She had heard the rumors all day. Ambrose Blackwell, her husband, the powerful real estate tycoon, had been spotted again. This time, not in some shadowy corner, but openly at a luxury hotel with his mistress, Sienna Vance. There had been laughter, champagne, and photographs. None of it surprised her anymore. But what shattered her was the realization that he didn't even bother hiding it now. She had loved him. She had given up her small teaching career, her independence, her friends, to become the wife he said he wanted. For years, she believed the price was worth it. But tonight, with her child kicking inside her, she finally saw the truth. The elevator dinged. Her heart tightened. Heavy footsteps echoed through the marble hallway. The scent of expensive cologne, mixed with the faint trace of another woman's perfume, seeped into the room. Ambrose appeared in the doorway. His tailored suit was slightly wrinkled, his tie loosened, his smile still dripping with arrogance. Behind him walked Sienna, younger, bolder, her sequin dress clinging like a second skin. Her laughter sliced through Jacqueline like glass. Jacqueline stood. "Ambrose," she whispered, her voice trembling but steady enough to carry. She held the papers out. "It's over, can't do this anymore. Not for me, not for our baby. Sign these." For a moment the room froze. Ambrose stared at her as if she had told a joke. Then, slowly, a smirk spread across his face. He sauntered forward, plucking the papers from her fragile hands. He didn't even look at them. With one swift motion he tore them straight down the middle, then again, and again. Shreds of her courage fluttered to the floor like broken wings. "You think you can leave me?" Ambrose's voice was cruel, mocking. He leaned close, his words a hiss. "You're nothing without me, Jacqueline. Nothing. A washed-up schoolteacher carrying a belly. Who would want you?" Sienna's laugh rang out, sharp and merciless. "She looks pathetic, Ambrose. Look at her. 7 months pregnant, still clinging to your name. How pitiful." Jacqueline's throat closed. She wanted to scream, to defend herself, to tell them that dignity was still hers. But the words wouldn't come. All she felt was the child inside her moving, reminding her that she couldn't collapse, not now. Ambrose dropped the shredded papers onto the glass table, letting them scatter like confetti at a cruel celebration. He poured himself a drink, raised the glass, and smirked again. "You'll stay right here, Jacqueline. You'll give birth to my child, and then you'll fade into the background where you belong. That's the only role you have left." Tears blurred her vision. She clutched her belly with one hand, the other gripping the edge of the table just to stay upright. The man she once believed was her soulmate now stood before her. A stranger, worse than a stranger, a tormentor. Sienna slid her arm around Ambrose's waist, her red lips curling into a victorious smile. "Face it, sweetheart," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "You've already lost. You're just an obstacle he hasn't bothered to remove yet." Jacqueline turned away, swallowing back the sobs threatening to escape. She wanted to collapse. She wanted to disappear. But something inside her shifted. For the first time in months, maybe years, a different kind of fire sparked within her chest. It wasn't hope yet. It wasn't strength. But it was something dangerous, something that could grow. Ambrose raised his glass higher, as if delivering a toast. "To my future," he declared, pressing his lips to Sienna's cheek. "And to my wife, soon to be forgotten." The ice in Jacqueline's veins hardened. Forgotten? No, not yet. Not ever. Her fingers tightened over her belly, her pulse racing with a silent vow. She wouldn't break. She wouldn't vanish. She would rise. And when she did, Ambrose Blackwell would regret every word he had spoken tonight. Before Jacqueline Mitchell became the woman standing broken in that glittering penthouse, she was someone else entirely. She had once been a teacher. Not just any teacher, but the kind who stayed late after school to help struggling children sound out words or finish their math homework. In her classroom, decorated with handmade posters and soft pastel curtains, her students called her Miss Sunshine. She believed in them, every single one, no matter how small their voice or how poor their background. To those kids, she was a hero. She hadn't grown up with wealth or privilege. Her parents were factory workers in a small town outside Buffalo. Life was modest, sometimes difficult, but always filled with love. Jacqueline's childhood was the sound of her father's laughter at the dinner table and the sight of her mother's tired hands kneading bread after a long day. From them, she learned resilience, humility, and the importance of building a family on trust. When she moved to New York City in her early 20s, she carried those lessons with her. She wanted more, not money, but opportunity. She dreamed of shaping young minds, of carving out a space where children felt safe and valued. For a time, she succeeded. Her apartment was tiny, her meals simple, but she was happy. She had friends, colleagues, and the quiet pride of knowing she was making a difference. And then she met Ambrose Blackwell. It had been at a charity event for literacy programs. She was there as a volunteer, helping children perform a short play. He was there as a sponsor, standing tall in his tailored suit, commanding the room without effort. Their eyes met across the stage lights, and for Jacqueline, it felt like the world had tilted. Ambrose was charming then, disarmingly so. He complimented her passion, asked about her students, and seemed genuinely interested in the stories she told. For a girl who had always put others before herself, being noticed by a man of his stature felt intoxicating. Within months, they were inseparable. Dinners at candlelit restaurants, weekend trips to the Hamptons, whispered promises beneath city lights. It all felt like a dream too perfect to last. Her friends warned her. "He's too fast, too smooth," they said. "Be careful, Jacqueline. Men like him play for keeps, and not always in a good way." But she didn't listen. Her heart was full, her mind clouded by the idea that love could be this dazzling. They married within a year. The wedding was lavish, a spectacle that made headlines in society magazines. For Jacqueline, the glamour was overwhelming. But she clung to the belief that underneath it all, Ambrose was the man who had once admired her for her kindness. In the beginning, he was attentive. He kissed her forehead before leaving for work, left notes on the counter, and even joined her at school events. But slowly, cracks began to form. The notes stopped. The kisses became perfunctory. The dinners turned into long nights of waiting while he attended business meetings that stretched past dawn. Jacqueline told herself it was temporary. He was building an empire after all. She could be patient. She could be the supportive wife. Then came the pregnancy. When she told Ambrose the news, his reaction was complicated. He smiled, yes, but there was a flicker in his eyes, a calculation, a hesitation she couldn't ignore. Still, she buried the unease, convincing herself that a child would bring them closer, that this baby would make them a family in the truest sense. But instead of closeness, there came distance. Ambrose grew colder, distracted, and more irritable. He complained about the cost of baby supplies, about her needing more rest, about the inconvenience of her doctor appointments. It was as if her pregnancy was a burden, not a blessing. And Jacqueline, she swallowed her pain. She told herself not to nag, not to push him away. She took prenatal vitamins, decorated the nursery alone, and sang lullabies to the tiny life inside her when nights grew unbearable. Still, she kept her faith. She had always been a believer in love, in second chances. She told herself Ambrose was under pressure, that once the baby arrived, things would be different. But then she found the first lipstick stain on his collar. It wasn't hers. It was bright, bold red, the kind she never wore. The smell of unfamiliar perfume clung to his jacket. When she asked, he laughed it off. "Clients, Jacqueline, you're imagining things." His voice was smooth, too smooth, and she wanted so desperately to believe him. Then came the late-night calls, the secretive texts, the hushed arguments on the balcony where he thought she couldn't hear. Each time she confronted him, he turned it back on her. "You're paranoid, you're hormonal, stop embarrassing yourself." Her friends saw the change. Her once bright smile dimmed, her laughter faded. But she told no one the full truth. Out of pride, out of shame, out of fear that if she admitted what was happening, it would become too real. Now, standing in that penthouse, 7 months pregnant, watching the man she had once adored shred her divorce papers, she realized something. She had given everything, her career, her independence, her heart, and received nothing but betrayal in return. The girl who once inspired children to dream had been reduced to a shadow, but deep inside, the fire was still there, buried beneath layers of sorrow and silence. And though Ambrose believed he had broken her, Jacqueline Mitchell was not finished, because in the ashes of humiliation, she was beginning to remember who she used to be, and who she could still become. New York was a city of extremes. For the wealthy elite, it was a playground of diamonds and champagne. For Jacqueline, it had become a gilded prison. Everywhere she looked, the contrast was sharp. Outside, the world sparkled with opulence. Limousines gliding through avenues, society galas splashed across magazines, rooftop parties where champagne flowed like water. Inside her home, silence and shadows wrapped around her like a shroud. Ambrose thrived in that glittering world. To him, New York wasn't just a city, it was his kingdom. He knew every private club, every exclusive rooftop, every charity gala where deals were struck with a handshake and a smile. He loved the spotlight, the whispers of envy that followed him when he entered a room, and he never arrived alone anymore. Sienna was always on his arm, a deliberate display of youth and arrogance. The city adored it. The tabloids ate it up. Blackwell's stunning companion, one headline had read, plastered beneath a photo of Ambrose in his tuxedo, hand resting possessively on Sienna's hip. Not a single word about the wife carrying his child at home. Not a single acknowledgement that Jacqueline even existed. Jacqueline clipped those articles quietly and tucked them away. She didn't know why. Maybe to remind herself she wasn't crazy, that his betrayal wasn't just a paranoid fantasy. Maybe because some part of her wanted evidence for the day when truth would matter more than appearances. Meanwhile, her world shrank. Her life revolved around doctor's appointments, quiet walks in the park, and late nights staring out the window at a city alive with everything she couldn't touch. The penthouse was luxurious, yes, but it was cold. Marble floors, high ceilings, glittering chandeliers, all beautiful, all empty. She missed her tiny apartment from years ago, where she and her roommate laughed over cheap takeout and dreamt about the future. Back then, happiness wasn't measured in gold, but in genuine moments. Ambrose, on the other hand, only grew bolder. He no longer bothered with excuses. Nights turned into mornings before he stumbled home, smelling of perfume and liquor. His phone buzzed constantly, but if she dared to ask, he sneered. "Business, Jacqueline. Stop nagging." One evening, she caught her reflection in the mirror. 7 months pregnant, pale from exhaustion, dressed in a simple maternity gown that clung awkwardly to her frame. She hardly recognized herself. Where was the woman full of light, the teacher with laughter in her voice? Gone, buried beneath humiliation. Still, Ambrose expected her presence at events, not because he wanted her there, but because appearances mattered. At least once a month, he paraded her into a ballroom filled with diamonds and silk, only to abandon her in a corner while he networked, laughed, and flirted with Sienna under the noses of everyone present. Those nights were the cruelest. Jacqueline would stand among the wives of investors, their gowns shimmering, their jewelry dazzling under crystal chandeliers. Their conversations were sharp, laced with hidden daggers. Some offered pitying smiles. Others whispered loud enough for her to hear. "She looks tired." "Poor thing, carrying his child while he flaunts another woman." Their words burned more than silence ever could. But she endured. For the baby. For some shred of dignity she wasn't ready to lose. The world of glamour was intoxicating but unforgiving. At one particular gala, the Bright Futures Ball, Jacqueline sat at their table while Ambrose and Sienna laughed with donors across the room. Her hands rested protectively on her belly as the orchestra played, the sound of violins rising over the clinking of champagne glasses. She forced a smile, but inside she was breaking. Then came the final blow. A waiter passed with a silver tray, offering copies of a society magazine hot off the press. On the cover, Ambrose and Sienna photographed leaving a hotel. The headline screamed, "Blackwell's new power couple?" Her cheeks burned. The women at the table smirked. Ambrose didn't even flinch. He leaned back in his chair, one arm casually draped around Sienna, as if Jacqueline wasn't sitting 3 feet away. The humiliation was complete. When she excused herself to the powder room, she stared at her reflection again. The mascara she had so carefully applied was streaked with tears. Her stomach tightened, not just from pregnancy, but from rage she didn't yet know how to use. She pressed both hands against the counter, breathing heavily. For a moment she thought she might collapse, but she didn't. She lifted her chin, wiped her tears, and whispered to herself, "Not forever. This won't be forever." That night, she returned home alone. Ambrose had stayed out with Sienna, as always. Jacqueline walked into the nursery she had decorated by herself, a room painted soft yellow with a crib she had chosen carefully. She traced the outline of the tiny blankets, her heart aching. She wanted her child to be born into love, not lies. The contrast was unbearable. Outside, flashing cameras, laughter, music, a world that celebrated betrayal as if it were glamorous. Inside, loneliness, silence, and a woman fading more each day. Yet somewhere deep within, something began to shift. For every insult, every slight, every whispered humiliation, a new layer of steel was forming around her heart. She didn't yet know what she would do, or how she would survive. But she knew one thing: she could not remain in this prison forever. One afternoon, as snow began to fall lightly over Central Park, she stood at the window, watching children throw snowballs, their laughter echoing against the glass. She pressed her palm against her belly, whispering to her unborn child, "You will not grow up seeing me like this. I promise you, one day I'll find the strength to show you what dignity looks like." Her words were soft, but they were a vow, and fate was listening. Because while Jacqueline struggled in silence, the city's elite whispered louder. Another gala was coming, one bigger, brighter, and crueler than the rest. It would be the stage where Ambrose and Sienna planned to shine, to cement their place as New York's new it couple. And it would be the night where Jacqueline would suffer her deepest humiliation yet. But what none of them knew was that this same night would also mark the beginning of her transformation, and the end of Ambrose Blackwell's untouchable reign. If Ambrose was the king of New York's real estate empire, then Sienna Vance was the jewel he flaunted for the world to admire. She was 24, with a body sculpted for attention and a laugh that carried like broken glass in the air. Every room she entered shifted its orbit toward her. She wasn't born into wealth, but she had learned quickly how to move in those circles. The perfect dress, the perfect smile, the perfect balance of innocence and audacity. To Ambrose, she was more than a mistress. She was an accessory, a shiny prize to prove that he was still powerful enough to claim youth, beauty, and desire, no matter the cost. To Sienna, Ambrose was her ticket out of obscurity, her elevator to the top floors of society's most exclusive towers. But to Jacqueline, she was a nightmare with a face. The first time Jacqueline had seen them together in public, she thought her heart had stopped. It was at the Crystal Renaissance Hotel, during a fundraising gala for children's education. Ironically, the same cause she had once dedicated her teaching career to. The chandeliers sparkled above, violins filled the air, and the city's elite gathered in glittering gowns and tuxedos. Ambrose walked in late, as he often did, but he wasn't alone. Sienna was at his side, her crimson dress clinging like fire, her hand resting on his chest as though she owned him. Cameras flashed, reporters whispered, and heads turned. And Jacqueline, seated at their table, 7 months pregnant, wearing a navy gown that suddenly felt too plain, watched as her husband introduced another woman as though she were his partner. She had wanted to scream. She had wanted to cry. Instead, she sat frozen, her hands clenched over her swollen belly, forcing her body not to collapse under the weight of humiliation. That night was only the beginning. Sienna quickly became a fixture at Ambrose's side. She was spotted at board meetings, photographed leaving hotels, and even rumored to have a say in company affairs. What had once been whispered became open knowledge. Ambrose Blackwell no longer cared to hide his betrayal. But Sienna didn't stop there. She sought Jacqueline out, as if cruelty were her sport. At luncheons, she would accidentally brush past Jacqueline, letting her perfume linger like poison. At charity events, she would laugh too loudly at Ambrose's jokes, her manicured hand lingering on his arm for everyone to see. And then came the words, the daggers disguised as sweetness. "You really should rest more, Jacqueline," she said one evening at a gallery opening, her lips curved in a fake smile. "Pregnancy takes such a toll on older women." Jacqueline, only 29, felt her cheeks burn. She turned away, refusing to give Sienna the satisfaction of a reply. But the laughter that followed her was a humiliation she couldn't escape. Sienna thrived on those moments. She knew the society wives were watching, whispering, enjoying the scandal. And the more Jacqueline withdrew, the stronger Sienna's confidence grew. She wasn't just Ambrose's mistress anymore, she was becoming his statement. The cruelty reached its peak on the night of the Winter Gala, the most anticipated event of the season. The ballroom at the Metropolitan Museum glittered with ice sculptures and gold-trimmed tables. It was a night where reputations were cemented, where alliances were formed, and where Ambrose intended to show the world who truly belonged at his side. Jacqueline arrived late. She had almost stayed home, too ashamed to face another evening of whispers and stares. But something inside her pushed her forward. She couldn't hide forever. She walked into the ballroom slowly, her baby pressing heavily against her ribs, her gown simple but elegant. She didn't make it 5 steps before the whispers began. There she is. Poor thing. Still holding on. Doesn't she know it's over? And then across the room, she saw them. Ambrose in his black tuxedo, tall and confident. Sienna beside him, dazzling in a silver gown that caught the light like a weapon. They looked like a couple straight from the cover of a magazine, and they wanted everyone to see. Jacqueline's heart thudded painfully. She tried to walk past them, to find a quiet corner where she could disappear. But Sienna had other plans. "Jacqueline!" Sienna's voice rang out, sweet and mocking all at once. The crowd turned. Cameras flashed. Jacqueline froze as Sienna glided toward her, dragging Ambrose with her like a trophy. "You made it," Sienna cooed, kissing the air near Jacqueline's cheek. "How brave of you. I wasn't sure you'd want to be here tonight, given everything." The crowd chuckled under their breath. Ambrose smirked. Jacqueline's lips trembled, but she forced them into a tight smile. "I'm here because I belong here." Sienna's eyes sparkled with cruelty. She leaned closer, her voice low enough for only Jacqueline to hear. "You don't belong anywhere. You're just the pregnant wife he hasn't thrown out yet." Jacqueline's chest constricted. For a moment she thought she might faint. But then, from somewhere deep inside, a flicker of defiance sparked. She straightened her shoulders and met Sienna's gaze. "Enjoy it while it lasts," Jacqueline whispered back. "Shiny things always lose their sparkle." Sienna's smile faltered just for a second, but Ambrose tightened his grip on her waist, and the smirk returned. The orchestra began to play, signaling the opening dance. Ambrose swept Sienna onto the floor, leaving Jacqueline standing alone in the middle of the crowd, exposed, humiliated, trembling. She felt every eye on her, every whisper cutting deeper than the last. She backed away slowly, her hands cradling her belly, until she reached the edge of the room. She wanted to run, but her legs were heavy, her body exhausted. She had never felt so small, so powerless. And then, just as tears blurred her vision, she noticed something. Across the ballroom at the far side of the dance floor, a man was watching her. His eyes weren't filled with pity. They were sharp, calculating, and strangely protective. He didn't look away when she met his gaze. In fact, he raised his glass slightly, as though acknowledging her presence, as though silently telling her she wasn't invisible. Jacqueline's breath caught. She didn't know who he was yet. But she would. Because that man was Ethan Blackwell, and his arrival would change everything. The Winter Gala was supposed to be a night of elegance. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, orchestras played timeless symphonies, and the air smelled of roses and expensive champagne. But for Jacqueline Mitchell, it became the stage of her deepest humiliation. She stood near the edge of the dance floor, 7 months pregnant, her navy gown clinging uncomfortably as sweat dampened her palms. All around her, laughter swirled like a cruel tide. At the center of it all, Ambrose Blackwell twirled Sienna across the polished floor. They looked radiant, like a perfect couple, their movements in sync as though the music belonged to them alone. Cameras flashed, immortalizing their every smile, every touch. The tabloids would have their story by morning. Ambrose Blackwell and his dazzling companions steal the show at the Winter Gala. Jacqueline knew what her part would be in the gossip. Nothing but a footnote, the abandoned wife too pathetic to fight back. Her chest ached. She turned, ready to slip away unnoticed, when she felt a hand on her arm. "Jacqueline, isn't it?" The voice belonged to a woman draped in emerald silk, her eyes sharp with curiosity. "You're Ambrose's wife, correct?" The question was loud enough to draw attention. A circle of faces turned toward her, their expressions a mixture of pity and hunger for scandal. Jacqueline forced a smile, her throat tightening. "Yes," the woman tilted her head. "You're brave to come tonight. Most women wouldn't." The words were meant as flattery, but the smirk betrayed their true intent. A ripple of laughter followed. Jacqueline's ears burned. Before she could retreat, Sienna appeared, gliding across the floor with Ambrose at her side. Her silver gown glittered like ice. "Darling," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "You've met Jacqueline, haven't you? She was Mrs. Blackwell." The crowd chuckled. Ambrose didn't correct her. He simply smirked, tightening his grip around Sienna's waist as if confirming the insult. Jacqueline's lips trembled. She wanted to scream, to tell them the truth, that she was still his wife, that she carried his child, that the vows they mocked had once meant something. But when she opened her mouth, no sound came. Only silence. Sienna leaned closer, her whisper loud enough for others to hear. "Don't take it so hard, Jacqueline. Some women just aren't built for this world. But don't worry, I'll take care of Ambrose now." The cruelty in her tone broke something inside Jacqueline. Tears stung her eyes. She turned to leave, but her heel caught on the hem of her gown. She stumbled, clutching her belly as gasps erupted around her. "Careful," someone muttered. "She shouldn't even be here." Poor thing. The humiliation was unbearable. Jacqueline steadied herself against a marble column, her vision swimming. She couldn't breathe. Her chest tightened, and panic clawed at her throat. For a terrifying moment, she thought she might collapse in front of them all. And then she heard it, a low, steady voice. "That's enough." The crowd parted. A tall man stepped forward, his presence commanding the room without effort. He wore a tailored charcoal suit, his expression sharp as steel. His eyes, dark and unreadable, locked onto Ambrose with a quiet intensity that silenced even the orchestra. It was Ethan Blackwell. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Whispers followed like sparks in dry grass. The other Blackwell. The rival. The estranged brother. Few people had ever seen Ethan in public. He was known for running a rival company, building his empire away from the spotlight, refusing interviews or society games. And yet here he was, walking straight toward Jacqueline. He stopped beside her, offering his arm. "Mrs. Blackwell," he said firmly, his voice carrying across the ballroom, "you shouldn't stand here alone." The title, Mrs. Blackwell, rang louder than the music. Whispers erupted. Faces turned. Ambrose's jaw tightened. Sienna's smile faltered. Jacqueline hesitated, her heart racing. No one had defended her in months. She had forgotten what it felt like to be acknowledged, respected. Slowly, she placed her trembling hand on Ethan's arm. He turned to Ambrose, his expression calm but lethal. "Parading your mistress while your wife carries your child?" His voice cut like glass. "Even for you, Ambrose, that's low." The ballroom froze. Ambrose's face reddened. "This is none of your concern, Ethan." "Oh, but it is," Ethan replied, his gaze unwavering. "When you disgrace the Blackwell name in front of half the city, it becomes everyone's concern." The crowd buzzed. Cameras clicked furiously. Sienna clutched Ambrose's arm, her face pale beneath her makeup. Jacqueline's pulse thundered in her ears. For the first time in months, she wasn't invisible. For the first time, someone had stood between her and humiliation. But that protection came at a cost. The crowd would talk. The tabloids would spin. And Ambrose would not forgive Ethan for this public challenge. Jacqueline tightened her grip on Ethan's arm, her lips parting as if to thank him. But before she could speak, Ambrose stepped forward, his voice low and dangerous. "You think you can undermine me in front of everyone?" His glare shifted between Jacqueline and Ethan. "Be careful, brother. You don't know what game you're playing." Ethan's jaw tightened. He leaned in slightly, his words meant only for Ambrose, though Jacqueline caught them. "On the contrary, I know exactly what game this is, and I'm prepared to win." The tension crackled like electricity. The orchestra had stopped playing entirely. Guests held their breath, sensing that they were witnessing the beginning of a war. Jacqueline's knees shook. She wasn't sure if it was fear, relief, or something more dangerous. A flicker of hope. Because for the first time she realized she wasn't alone in this battle. Someone powerful was willing to stand with her. And that night, under the golden chandeliers, the battle lines between Ambrose and Ethan Blackwell were drawn. with Jacqueline at the very center. The ride home after the winter gala felt endless. Jacqueline sat alone in the back of the limousine, her hands wrapped around her belly as if her unborn child were the only thing anchoring her to the earth. The city lights blurred outside the tinted windows, streaks of gold and red that felt unreal, like a world she no longer belonged to. Across town, Ambrose would be celebrating his triumph with Sienna. Champagne, laughter, maybe even more photographs to humiliate her by morning. She could already imagine the headlines. Blackwell brothers clash at gala. Pregnant wife caught in the middle. They would twist her pain into entertainment, her humiliation into gossip for strangers. By the time she stepped out of the car and entered the penthouse, her body felt heavier than ever. The silence of the apartment pressed against her chest like a weight. She set her clutch down on the marble counter, her fingers trembling. The shredded remains of the divorce papers still sat in the trash can, a mocking reminder of Ambrose's cruelty. She sank onto the velvet chaise in the living room, her breath shallow. The chandelier above glowed softly, but it gave no warmth. She pressed both hands to her swollen belly and whispered, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." The tears came then, hot, unstoppable, relentless. She cried until her throat was raw, until her body shook so violently she feared it would harm the baby. Months of swallowed pain poured out in violent sobs. She remembered the look on Sienna's face, the smirk as she whispered, "You don't belong anywhere." She remembered Ambrose's silence, his refusal to defend her, his public embrace of another woman, and she remembered Ethan's voice cutting through the noise. That's enough. It had been the first kindness she'd received in so long. But instead of soothing her, it only made her grief heavier. Because it reminded her of what love was supposed to feel like, protective, steady, loyal. Things Ambrose had stolen from her years ago. She rose unsteadily and walked into the nursery. The soft yellow walls, the tiny crib, the mobile of stars she had ordered online. It was all ready, all waiting. But instead of filling her with joy, it filled her with dread. How could she bring a child into this world, into this loveless, fractured home? How could she teach her baby strength when she herself felt so weak? She sat on the edge of the crib and broke again, her sobs muffled into the blanket she had stitched by hand. "What kind of mother am I?" she whispered. "What kind of future will you have?" The clock ticked past 2 in the morning. The apartment remained silent. She was alone, truly, terrifyingly alone. For a fleeting, dangerous moment, her mind wandered to places it shouldn't. What if she disappeared? What if she packed a single bag, left everything behind, and vanished into the night? No more tabloids, no more humiliation, no more Ambrose. But where would she go? She had no job, no money of her own, no friends left in the city. Ambrose had made sure of that. Piece by piece, he had stripped away her independence until she was nothing but his possession. Her despair deepened. She rose, pacing the room, her breath ragged. At one point, her vision swam and her knees buckled. She gripped the dresser to keep from collapsing. Panic clawed at her chest. Was it stress, or was it the baby? She forced herself to breathe, slow and steady, whispering lullabies under her breath. The baby kicked gently, reminding her that she wasn't completely alone. That tiny flutter of life pulled her back from the brink. Still, she couldn't silence the fear. The fear of being trapped forever in Ambrose's shadow. The fear of raising her child in a home poisoned by cruelty. Finally, near dawn, she stumbled back into the living room. She collapsed onto the couch, exhaustion swallowing her whole. The city outside was waking, but for Jacqueline, time felt frozen. Her eyes drifted toward the door. For a moment, she thought she saw a shadow beneath the crack of light on the floor. A trick of exhaustion, she told herself. But then, a soft thud. Her heart lurched. She pushed herself up and shuffled to the door. On the floor, just inside the entryway, was a large envelope. No knock, no note, just an envelope, thick and heavy. Her fingers trembled as she picked it up. Across the front, in bold, sharp handwriting, was her name, Jacqueline. She swallowed hard, tearing it open. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. Ambrose and Sienna, together in restaurants, leaving hotels, exchanging envelopes with men she didn't recognize. Each photo was stamped with dates and times, clear evidence of betrayal, corruption, perhaps even crime. And tucked at the very bottom was a single card, no signature, no explanation, just 4 words, written with deliberate precision. "You are not alone." Jacqueline's breath caught, her pulse hammered. The despair that had nearly destroyed her hours ago shifted into something else, something sharper, something alive. Someone was watching. Someone knew. Someone cared enough to act. Her mind reeled. Who could it be? A stranger? A friend she thought she'd lost? Or her heart jolted. The man at the gala, Ethan Blackwell. And in that moment, Jacqueline realized her story wasn't ending. It was only beginning. Morning sunlight spilled across the penthouse, pale and cold, as though even the sun had no warmth left for her. Jacqueline sat on the couch, the envelope of photographs spread across the coffee table. She had barely slept, her mind spinning with fear and questions. Each picture was undeniable. Ambrose with Sienna, his hand on her waist. Ambrose exchanging thick envelopes with unfamiliar men. Ambrose in a private room at a luxury hotel, smiling too confidently for it to be business. These weren't rumors or whispers. This was evidence. And that card, those 4 words, haunted her. You are not alone. She hadn't decided what to do when a knock came at the door. Firm, deliberate, not the careless pounding Ambrose used when he forgot his keys. Her heart raced. She considered ignoring it, but something inside urged her forward. She opened the door and froze. It was him, the man from the gala, Ethan Blackwell. Up close, his presence was even more commanding. Tall, broad-shouldered, his dark hair perfectly in place, his eyes sharp but not unkind. He didn't smile, didn't soften his expression, but there was a steadiness in his gaze that steadied her in return. "Jacqueline," he said simply, his voice low and calm. Her throat went dry. "You, why are you here?" He glanced past her into the apartment, then held up a small leather folder. "Because you need answers, and because Ambrose is more dangerous than you realize." She hesitated, then stepped aside. He entered, moving with quiet confidence as if he'd been here before. She clutched her belly protectively, torn between fear and a strange sense of safety. Ethan set the folder on the table beside the photographs she had received. His eyes flickered to them, then back to her. "I see you've already had a delivery." "You sent them," she whispered. He gave a single nod. "I've been watching him for months, gathering proof. He's been sloppy, too arrogant to hide his trail. But I couldn't risk delivering this directly at first. I had to make sure you were ready." Jacqueline's breath caught. "Why? Why help me?" For a moment, silence stretched. Then Ethan sat across from her, his posture straight, his expression unreadable. "Because Ambrose isn't just my brother. He's my enemy, and he's about to destroy himself and anyone tied to him. That includes you and your child." Her head sputtered. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Half-brother. We share the same father. But while Ambrose inherited his charm and hunger for wealth, I inherited the will to build something lasting. We've been rivals from the beginning. He craves attention. I crave results. He destroys. I rebuild." Jacqueline's mind reeled. She had heard whispers of another Blackwell in the city, a shadow figure running a rival corporation, powerful but private. She had never connected him to Ambrose. Never imagined he would walk into her life. "I didn't want to involve you," Ethan continued, his tone firm. "But when I saw how he paraded Sienna, how he humiliated you at the gala, I couldn't stand by any longer." Her lips trembled. "Why me? Why not just let him ruin himself?" Ethan leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers. "Because you're the only one he can still use as a shield. As long as you remain silent, he believes he's untouchable. But you hold the key to everything. With your testimony, your courage, and these files, we can bring him down." Jacqueline's pulse hammered. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust the strength in his voice, the certainty in his gaze, but fear clung to her ribs. "I don't know if I can," she whispered. "I don't know if I'm strong enough." Ethan's voice softened, just slightly. "You already are. You survived him. That's proof enough." Tears filled her eyes. No one had spoken to her like that in years. No one had seen her as more than a burden, a fragile shadow. But Ethan did. He opened the leather folder, spreading documents across the table. Bank statements, wire transfers, property deeds in other names. He's laundering money through shell companies. He's bribing officials. If this comes to light, Ambrose won't just lose his reputation. He'll lose everything. Jacqueline stared at the evidence. Part of her felt vindicated, relieved that his cruelty might finally face consequence. Another part trembled with fear. This wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was danger. If Ambrose discovered she had this information, he would destroy her without hesitation. As if reading her thoughts, Ethan said quietly, "That's why you can't face him alone. But with me, with my resources, my network, you'll be safe." Safe. The word felt foreign, like something from another life. She wiped her eyes, trying to steady herself. "And what do you want in return?" For the first time, Ethan allowed a hint of a smile. It wasn't cruel like Ambrose's, but it carried a weight of unspoken meaning. Justice, nothing more, and perhaps, his gaze lingered for a fraction longer. Perhaps a chance to prove not all Blackwell men are the same. Her cheeks warmed, though she quickly looked away. She wasn't ready for trust, not yet. But the flicker of hope his words sparked terrified her almost as much as it comforted her. The baby kicked gently, and Jacqueline pressed her hand against her belly. Her child's life was tied to this decision. If she sided with Ethan, she would be declaring war on her husband, on the father of her child. But if she didn't, she would remain trapped, invisible, humiliated. Her breath shook as she whispered, "What do I have to do?" Ethan gathered the documents neatly, sliding them back into the folder. His voice was calm, deliberate. "First, you stay quiet. Let him think he still controls you. Second, you trust me to handle the rest. And third," he paused, his gaze steady, "you prepare yourself for the day we end this, in public." Jacqueline's heart pounded. She pictured it, standing in front of the same glittering crowd that had mocked her, but this time, with truth on her side. Could she do it? Could she survive the storm? Ethan stood, adjusting his suit. "Ambrose has always underestimated you. That's his greatest weakness. Use it. Let him believe you're broken. When the time comes, his downfall will be absolute." He moved toward the door. Jacqueline rose slowly, her voice trembling. "Ethan, why now? Why not years ago?" He stopped, his back to her. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, without turning, he replied, "Because I didn't care before, but now I do." The door clicked shut behind him, leaving Jacqueline alone in the silence. Her pulse thundered. Her tears had dried. For the first time, she felt something stronger than despair. Resolve. And in that fragile, electrifying moment, Jacqueline made a vow. If Ethan was truly by her side, Ambrose Blackwell would never see his destruction coming. The morning after Ethan's visit felt different. The world outside still hummed with its usual chaos, cars honking, sirens wailing, the city rushing forward without pause. But inside Jacqueline, something had shifted. For months, she had lived like a shadow, dragged lower and lower until she forgot she had once been a woman with dreams, a voice, a life of her own. But now there was a spark. It wasn't hope yet. It wasn't strength. But it was the memory of both, a whisper from the woman she used to be, telling her to rise. She spent the day in silence, moving through the penthouse like a ghost, but her mind was alive. Ethan's words echoed over and over. "Ambrose has always underestimated you. That's his greatest weakness." She thought about every time Ambrose laughed in her face, every time Sienna smirked at her swollen belly, every whisper from the society wives who pitied her. They all saw her as weak, fragile, a footnote. What if she let them keep thinking that, until the moment she chose to strike? By afternoon, she stood in front of the mirror. The woman staring back was pale, worn, broken, but Jacqueline forced herself not to look away. "You're still here," she whispered to her reflection, "and you're not done." That was the moment the transformation began. It started small. She made an appointment with her doctor to ensure the baby was healthy, because before she could rise, she needed to know her child was safe. The news came back good. The baby was strong, resilient, thriving. The relief was overwhelming. For the first time in months, she smiled. Next, she called a salon. It had been nearly a year since she'd done anything for herself. Her hair, once soft and full of life, hung dull around her shoulders. That afternoon, under the gentle buzz of dryers and the scent of lavender shampoo, she watched strands of brokenness fall away. When the stylist spun her around, Jacqueline hardly recognized the woman in the mirror. Her hair shone again, styled with elegance instead of neglect. She felt lighter, freer. The following days became a ritual of reclamation. She met with a discreet personal stylist recommended by Ethan's network. Together, they rebuilt her wardrobe piece by piece. Not for Ambrose, not for society, but for herself. Gone were the plain maternity dresses chosen to blend into the background. Instead, there were tailored gowns, strong colors, elegant cuts that celebrated her pregnancy rather than hiding it. For the first time, Jacqueline realized she could look powerful, even while carrying life. The stylist held up a deep emerald gown, its fabric shimmering under the lights. "This," she said firmly, "is the color of rebirth. Wear it, and no one will ever call you invisible again." Jacqueline ran her hands across the fabric, her throat tightening. She had forgotten how it felt to be seen. But the transformation wasn't just external. Ethan pushed her further. One afternoon, he invited her to his private office, a sleek, glass-walled building overlooking the Hudson. The room was filled with files, monitors, and maps of Ambrose's empire. Jacqueline sat across from Ethan, nerves prickling, as he slid folders toward her. "This is the battlefield," he said. "If you want to fight, you need to understand it." For hours, they went through documents tracing Ambrose's corruption. Ethan didn't shield her from the ugliness. He showed her everything: the bribes, the embezzlement, the lies. At first, Jacqueline's hands shook as she turned the pages, but slowly the trembling stopped. Each document, each damning piece of evidence, replaced her fear with fury. By evening, her eyes burned, but her voice was steady. "He thinks I'm weak," she said quietly. "He thinks I'll stay silent, but he doesn't know me anymore." Ethan studied her, his expression unreadable. Finally, he nodded. "Good, you'll need that fire." The sessions continued. Ethan coached her on handling questions, on standing firm under pressure. He taught her how to look someone in the eye without flinching, how to turn humiliation into power. It wasn't easy. Jacqueline cried more than once, overwhelmed by the weight of what lay ahead. But each time she stood back up. One evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, Ethan handed her a small box. Inside was a delicate silver necklace with a single star-shaped pendant. "What's this?" she asked, her voice soft. "A reminder," he said, "that no matter how dark it gets, even the smallest light can guide the way." Her throat tightened. She clasped the necklace around her neck, her hand resting over it. For the first time in a long while, she felt not just protected, but valued. Weeks passed. The city prepared for another gala, the most prestigious of the year. Invitations glittered with gold lettering, promising an evening of grandeur. Ambrose planned to attend with Sienna, no doubt ready to cement their image as the power couple of New York. But this time, Jacqueline would not hide in the shadows. On the day of the event, she dressed slowly, deliberately. The emerald gown hugged her figure, draping elegantly over her belly. Her hair gleamed under soft waves, her makeup subtle yet commanding. When she looked in the mirror, she didn't see the broken woman from months ago. She saw someone reborn. Ethan arrived to escort her. For a moment, he simply stood in the doorway, his eyes lingering on her. "You're ready," he said. Jacqueline's lips curved in a faint smile. "I am." Together they rode through the city in a black car, the lights of New York flickering around them. Jacqueline pressed her hand over her child and whispered silently, "This is for us." When they arrived at the gala, the cameras flashed wildly. Reporters leaned forward, their pens scratching furiously. Gasps rippled through the crowd as Jacqueline stepped out of the car, radiant in emerald, her arm linked with Ethan's. The whispers began immediately. "She looks incredible." "Is that Ethan Blackwell? What does this mean?" But Jacqueline didn't shrink. She didn't bow her head. She walked tall, every step a declaration. "I am not invisible. I am not broken. I am here." Inside the ballroom, heads turned. Ambrose's smile faltered the moment he saw her. Sienna's hand tightened on his arm, her eyes narrowing with fury. Jacqueline met their gaze across the room. For the first time, she didn't feel pain. She didn't feel fear. She felt power. The orchestra swelled. The crowd leaned closer. The night had only just begun. And before it was over, Jacqueline Mitchell would no longer be the woman they mocked. She would be the woman they feared. The ballroom at the Waldorf Grand shimmered with gold and crystal. Waiters in white gloves moved swiftly between tables, balancing trays of champagne. A string quartet played softly in the corner, their notes carrying beneath the hum of New York's most powerful elite. For most, it was another night of glamour. For Jacqueline, it was the battlefield. She stepped into the room, emerald gown flowing behind her, every movement deliberate, every step steady. Cameras exploded with flashes. She could feel the whispers spreading like wildfire. "Is that Jacqueline? She looks completely different. And Ethan Blackwell, he's with her?" She kept her chin high, her hand resting lightly on Ethan's arm. The necklace he had given her, the star pendant, gleamed at her throat like a beacon. She no longer felt like the forgotten wife. She felt like a storm walking into the room. Across the ballroom, Ambrose stiffened. His glass hovered halfway to his lips, his smirk faltering as his eyes locked on her. Sienna, dressed in scarlet sequins, followed his gaze. The smile on her lips froze, turning brittle. Jacqueline and Ethan moved through the crowd, parting it like a tide. When they reached the center of the room, Ethan leaned toward her. "Remember," he whispered. "Don't flinch. Tonight, you own the room." Jacqueline's heart pounded, but she nodded. She had come too far to turn back now. The master of ceremonies stepped onto the stage, tapping the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight for the annual Winter Benefactors Gala. Tonight, we honor those whose contributions have shaped this city." Polite applause followed. Ambrose straightened, tugging Sienna closer. He had been waiting for this moment. His moment. He was to be introduced as the keynote donor, the man whose fortune built schools and hospitals. His image was to be immortalized as generosity itself. But tonight, that script would burn. The MC continued. "And now, please welcome." Ethan stepped forward, his voice ringing out before the announcer could finish. "If I may." The room hushed. All eyes turned to him. Ambrose's jaw tightened, his grip on Sienna's hand like iron. Ethan gestured toward Jacqueline. "Before this city crowns another man a hero, perhaps it should see the truth." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Ethan signaled to a technician at the side of the stage. Instantly, the massive LED screen behind the orchestra flickered to life. At first a photograph appeared. Ambrose, hand on Sienna's waist, leaving a hotel at dawn. Laughter erupted, nervous, shocked, scandalized. More photos followed. Ambrose exchanging envelopes with shadowy figures. Ambrose signing papers under another name. Bank statements, wire transfers, shell corporations, all projected for the entire room to see. The whispers turned to outrage. "My God, he's been stealing! Bribery! This is criminal!" Ambrose's face drained of color. He lunged forward. "Turn that off, now!" But it was too late. The truth was spilling faster than he could contain. Jacqueline stepped forward, her voice calm but carrying. "For months I've been called weak, invisible, a woman to be pitied." Her gaze swept across the crowd. "But tonight, you'll see what I've endured, and what kind of man Ambrose Blackwell really is." The room froze. Cameras pivoted, capturing her every word. Her voice trembled at first, but it grew stronger, steadier, as she spoke. "He paraded another woman before me while I carried his child. He mocked me in front of all of you, and he believed I would never fight back. But here I am, and I'm done being silent." The applause began slowly, one clap, then another. Then the room erupted in cheers. For once, the sympathy wasn't laced with pity. It was admiration. Sienna pulled her arm from Ambrose, her eyes wide with fury. "You didn't tell me about this," she hissed. "You said you had it under control." Ambrose tried to recover. "She's lying. This is all fabricated." Ethan stepped closer, his presence commanding. "Really, Ambrose? Are these documents fabricated too?" He held up the folder Jacqueline had seen days earlier. "Because they're signed in your name, and I doubt the district attorney will agree with your excuses." The room exploded in chaos. Reporters shouted questions. Guests scrambled for the exits, not wanting to be associated with the scandal. Ambrose turned back to Jacqueline, his eyes blazing. "You think this changes anything? You think you've won?" Jacqueline met his glare, her voice calm. "No, Ambrose. I didn't win. You lost. All by yourself." The orchestra, silent until now, began to play again. Low, dramatic, almost mocking. The spotlight shifted back to the screen where the final photo appeared. Ambrose kissing Sienna outside his office. The image lingered like a nail in his coffin. Sienna yanked her arm free completely. "You're finished, Ambrose," she spat. "I don't go down with losers." She turned sharply, storming away, leaving him exposed and alone. Gasps followed. The great Ambrose Blackwell, abandoned by his mistress in front of the entire city. Ambrose staggered, rage twisting his features. He opened his mouth, ready to strike back with words, with anything, but security appeared at the edge of the stage. Two men in dark suits moved toward him. "Sir," one said firmly, "you'll need to come with us." Ambrose shoved them off. "Don't touch me. I built this city. I am Ambrose Blackwell." But his words fell flat. No one was listening anymore. Jacqueline stood tall, her hand over her belly, her necklace catching the light. She wasn't invisible. She wasn't forgotten. She was the center of the room. And for the first time in her life, Ambrose had no power left to take from her. But as he was led away, his eyes locked on hers, and in that glare burned a promise of revenge that was far from over. The night of the gala became front-page news. By dawn, every major outlet had plastered Ambrose Blackwell's fall from grace across their headlines. Blackwell Empire in ruins. Scandal rocks New York's elite. Pregnant wife exposes millionaire husband. Jacqueline sat in the quiet of Ethan's office, sipping tea as the world outside exploded with the story. For once, the chaos didn't frighten her. It empowered her. She had faced humiliation, betrayal, cruelty, and survived. More than survived, she had conquered. But her story wasn't finished. Ambrose fought back in the only way he knew, through threats, lawyers, and rage. For days, his team tried to bury the evidence, to silence Jacqueline's voice. Yet the documents Ethan had gathered were airtight. The district attorney opened an official investigation. The board of Blackwell Enterprises voted unanimously to remove Ambrose as CEO. Banks froze his accounts, partners withdrew their support. One by one, the pillars of his empire crumbled. And then came the final betrayal, the one Ambrose never saw coming. Sienna, the woman he had paraded before the world, struck her own deal. She sold exclusive interviews, gave prosecutors information he thought she'd keep hidden, and slipped into the arms of another investor. For a man who had believed he controlled everyone, being abandoned by his mistress was the cruelest cut of all. When Ambrose was finally escorted out of his penthouse in handcuffs, cameras flashing, he screamed her name, Jacqueline's name. Not in love, not in remorse, but in fury. "You'll regret this. I'll destroy you." But Jacqueline no longer trembled at his threats. She watched from a distance, her hand resting over her child. For the first time, she felt no fear. In the weeks that followed, her life transformed. The media, once cruel, now hailed her as brave. The woman who stood tall read one headline. She received letters from women across the country, wives, mothers, daughters, thanking her for giving them courage, for showing them they weren't powerless, no matter how broken they felt. But the greatest change wasn't in the papers. It was in her heart. She returned to teaching, not because she needed the job, but because she missed it. She missed the laughter of children, the joy of watching them learn. Walking into the classroom again, she felt alive. She wasn't just surviving, she was living. And she wasn't alone. Ethan was there, not as a savior, but as a partner. He never pushed, never demanded. He simply stood beside her, steady and strong, offering a safe space when the world felt too heavy. One evening, as they walked along the Hudson, the city lights glittering on the water, Jacqueline slowed, her hand resting on her belly. "I don't know if I could have done it without you," she admitted softly. Ethan looked at her, his expression calm, his eyes steady. "You could have. You just needed someone to remind you of your strength." Her chest tightened. For so long, she had been defined by Ambrose, by his cruelty, by his betrayal. Now she was free to define herself. When her son was born weeks later, she held him close, tears streaming down her cheeks. He was perfect, tiny fingers curling around hers, his cry filling the hospital room like music. She whispered into his ear, "You'll never see me broken, only strong, only standing tall." Ethan visited the hospital, bringing flowers, his usual composure softened by the sight of her with her child. He didn't need to say anything. The look in his eyes was enough. As for Ambrose, his downfall was complete. Convicted of fraud, bribery, and embezzlement, he lost everything. His company, his fortune, his freedom. The man who once strutted through ballrooms with arrogance was reduced to a cautionary tale. Jacqueline didn't celebrate his ruin. She didn't need to. Justice had been served. That was enough. Instead, she focused on the future. She opened a small foundation for single mothers, funded in part by settlements Ambrose was forced to pay. She dedicated it to giving women the tools she once lacked: support, education, independence. The foundation became her legacy, proof that pain could transform into purpose. Every step forward was a reminder. She had risen from the ashes. Months later, she stood again in a ballroom. Not as the humiliated wife, not as the pitied woman, but as the honored guest. The foundation had reached its first milestone, and tonight's gala was in her name. The lights shimmered, the crowd applauded, and for once, Jacqueline wasn't afraid of their eyes. She stood tall, emerald gown flowing, her son safe in the arms of a trusted friend nearby. Ethan was there too, as always, standing at her side. When she walked onto the stage to give her speech, she looked out at the faces, the same society that once whispered cruelly about her, and she smiled. Her voice was clear, strong. They told me I was weak. They told me I was nothing without a man. They told me I'd fade into the shadows. But women, mothers, wives, daughters, we are not weak. We are not invisible. We are not disposable. When we stand, when we speak, when we fight, the world changes. The room erupted in applause. Tears glistened in the eyes of women across the hall. And for Jacqueline, it was the final release, the catharsis she had longed for. She stepped down from the stage, her son's tiny hand reaching for her. Ethan offered his arm, and this time she took it not out of necessity but by choice. She had walked through fire, she had faced betrayal, humiliation, despair. But she had emerged stronger, fiercer, unbroken. And as the music swelled and the crowd rose to their feet, Jacqueline Mitchell whispered to herself words she would carry forever. I am not weak. I am free. So here we are, my dear friends. The story of Jacqueline has come to its end. But if you're still here with me right now, it means something in her journey touched your heart. Maybe you saw a piece of yourself in her pain, in her courage, in the way she refused to stay broken. That's the beautiful thing about stories like this. They aren't just entertainment, they are mirrors. They remind us of what we endure and what we're capable of overcoming. Life can be cruel. People will betray, disappoint, and sometimes leave us feeling invisible. But as the Stoic philosopher Epictetus once said, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it, that matters. Jacqueline could have let Ambrose's cruelty define her. Instead, she chose to rise, to rebuild, and to reclaim her dignity. And isn't that what we all must do when life pushes us down? Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." Every humiliation Jacqueline faced became the fuel for her transformation. And maybe that's the lesson for us. Our obstacles are not the end of our story, but the beginning of our strength. So if you're listening right now, maybe this is the reminder you needed. You are not weak. You are not disposable. You are not invisible. Whatever storm you're facing, you can stand again. You can speak again. And yes, you can shine again. And if this story reached you, if it lit even a small spark in your heart, then don't keep it to yourself. Like, share, and subscribe to this channel so more people can hear stories that heal, inspire, and remind us of our strength. Because sometimes all it takes is one story to change how we see our own. Now tell me, my wonderful friends, are you ready to rise again?